This session, Kyoshin and I decided to talk about the Lotus Sutra. For those of y'all that weren't here yesterday, Kyoshin gave a great little introduction to the Lotus Sutra. It is considered one of the mightiest, most renowned of Mahayana Buddhist texts, sutras. We're not exactly sure when it was written. Scholars think it was written piecemeal. I've seen 4th century, 5th century. Kyoshin yesterday said 2nd century or even, yeah, 1st century BC. So somewhere around there, we can figure a handful of hundreds of years after the Buddha, this was put together. It's a very long text. And just like many of the other sutras in the Tripitaka or the Pali Canon, it's kind of oriented around the Buddha speaking. So basically, the Lotus Sutra is, an account of what the Buddha said 5, 6, 7, 800 years after the Buddha. So who knows? And so just to kind of recap really quickly some things that Kyoshin talked about yesterday, one of the main themes of the Lotus Sutra is the oneness of all the different Buddhist paths. And I heard something interesting. Kyoshin sent a talk on the Lotus Sutra, which I will send out to everyone. But something interesting that this scholar guy said was at the time, hundreds of years after the Buddha, as it's like, spreading and different people are receiving the Dharma and it's kind of traveling around, it was different paths and different practices and different interpretations were like all kind of mixing. Just culturally, that's what was happening. And he contrasts it to modern day Buddhism in Asia, particularly in maybe Japan and China, where you have like very distinct Soto sect, and there's like a headquarters and there's a bureaucracy and there's like sub temples of this one particular sect. So he's contrasting that to this time when the Lotus Sutra was written, when people were kind of playing around. It's still kind of a fresh religion, and there's different writings, and things are carried orally, and then they're written down, and no one's really sure. And so, things are kind of blended generally. So he says that there's some people say that the Lotus Sutra is almost like a justification, kind of like a posteriori, I guess, kind of justification for why you can do lots of different paths, all different kinds of Buddhism. And primarily the Lotus Sutra is concerned with, or at least the little bit that I've read, it really seems to kind of highlight this contrast between arhatship. Arhats are the ones that dedicate their lives to awakening, entering nirvana, leaving the cycle of birth and death. Those are the cats that are going to lock themselves in a cave. Those are the cats that, totally renounce society and just focus on their own awakening. And even just this last Sunday, if you were here on Sunday for Shinsan's talk, he was talking about a friend that he has who is a Theravadan practitioner. And he was just talking about how this guy, really focuses his practice on like me attaining nirvana, achieving nirvana, leaving this mortal coil. So it still exists today, that kind of difference between that, the arhatship, the hinayana, the theravada, whatever, and then the bodhisattva path, which is more about staying here, staying here in the birth and death life cycle, staying in samsara, choosing to live in national city and welcome people of all different kinds of practices and faiths and everything, no practice at all, um, to try to wake everybody up first before I enter into nirvana. For myself, sometimes I think the Bodhisattva vow is an excuse for me to just buy more burritos and go to bars. It's interesting. Um, yeah, that's interesting that the Lotus Sutra can be seen as this kind of, justification for a blending of practices. And the other thing I wanted to point out that Kyoshin touched on yesterday, but I looked into a little bit more, and I just find it really important. Um, so at some point in the sutra, he talks about the three vehicles. One being that arhatship, I go out of here and experience nirvana and leave this samsara. And the second one being the bodhisattva path, where I dedicate my life to serving and saving and waking up others. And then there's this third path, pratyeka Buddha, pratika Buddha path, which is kind of like not a Buddhist path at all. But because what we wake up to is the universal truth of the universe, that's redundant, the absolute truth of the universe, then anybody can wake up to it. And some could say things that Jesus said were teachings of just this one Dharma, this one teaching of awakening. Countless beings. I mean, I really believe, I say it all the time in Dharma talks, I really do believe that every single sentient being, or at least humans, I guess, I don't know, whether they know it or not, whether they practice or not, at some point have experienced samadhi or kensho, or coming in touch with this one self, this one this. I really do believe that. Maybe it's just for an instant and then you forget about it. But this is not anything special or secret that we're cultivating here. This is available to all people at all times. And so, yeah, this third vehicle that he talks about is no matter what you do, no matter what your path, no matter what your vehicle, you're constantly coming in touch with your true self all the time, whether you know it or not. It's like we say in the Gatha before the Dharma talks. The Dharma is always encountered, yet rarely perceived. So, in the midst of your biggest crisis, you're most jealous, you're most greedy, you're most desirous, you're least grounded, you are encountering the perfect one Dharma. So, just wanted to point that out. And then, of course, this sutra is kind of Mahayana heavy, Mahayana being that bodhisattva path. And so there's a bunch of writing that says no matter what path you're on, whether you're an arhat or a bodhisattva or in a biker gang and happen to stumble upon enlightenment, no matter what, if you cultivate that, you will be a bodhisattva and you will enlighten other beings. And there's a bunch of chapters in the Lotus Sutra that talk about predictions. And it's just pages and pages and pages and pages of the Buddha predicting, You're going to get enlightenment and enlighten 1,000 beings. And you're going to get enlightenment and enlighten 1,000 beings. Like Oprah with enlightenment. I didn't think of that. It's so true. Look under your zafu. Enlightenment for everybody. That's funny. Um, yeah. So, these sutras are weird, and it's kind of oral history. It's very repetitive. Um, there will be stanza upon stanza of saying the same thing. And then just to hammer it home, they'll like redo all of it in like a different form. If any of you have read some of those early texts, it's just kind of mind numbing. But we're going to take a look anyway. I'm probably just going to end up reading it. But yeah, I'll see if I can add any kind of useful perspective. So Kyoshin was talking yesterday, about how Hakuin, who's a major Zen figure, um, I don't know when he was. Do you know what century? 1800s. Yeah, so he's a new cat. And he is sometimes credited with kind of compiling koan collections. Um, and very famous koan, What is the Sound of One Hand, comes from Hakuin. He was also an artist, did a lot of really cool stuff. So as Kyoshin pointed out yesterday, he apparently had some very deep experience reading chapter 3 of the Lotus Sutra. So I thought we could take a look at that. Chapter 3 basically starts with, gosh, it's so convoluted. But it's just a lot of Shariputra, who we know from the Heart Sutra. And Shariputra is a known Arhat, right? So he's kind of leading the Arhat folks, we're gonna just kind of get enlightenment for ourselves. And of course, that's why in the Heart Sutra, uh, Buddha or Avalokiteshvara, whatever form he takes, says, "O Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form." He's almost admonishing Shariputra for following this kind of lesser way. And we need to dedicate ourselves to serving all beings. Anyway, but then in the Lotus Sutra, Buddha kind of makes up for it. And he's like, I didn't mean it. You're not, really that bad. Like, you too are going to be enlightened and enlighten 1,000 beings. And goes into this whole prediction for Shariputra. And Shariputra in chapter 3, he's just so happy. He's like, oh, good. Like, we're not bad. We were all feeling really badly that we were doing this lesser vehicle thing. And then pages and pages and pages and pages. And, when I was taking my daily walking, I indulged in no other thought but this. Oh, how deluded I am by vain thoughts. Shall I in the future not preach the superior law in the world? He's like, but then you, Lord, have told me that I'm going to be great. And so there's a lot of that. And the Buddha's like, yes. And then the Buddha says, again, you will make this and that and that and that. And then he gets into this parable, this analogy that Kyoshin mentioned yesterday, which is really the heart of chapter 3, which is the burning house. Yeah, so he spends a very long time painting this picture of a beautiful big house. And there's all kinds of goodies in the house and rich and beautiful things. But he says that the foundation of the house is rotten. And the walls are actually starting to crumble on the inside. So he's already painting this picture of our samsaric life. All these beautiful things, love and family and food and movies and art and stars. But the foundation of that, consciousness, impermanence, is rotten. And we don't even know it. We're so lost in all the goodies of the house, we're not even aware that the very foundation that the house is built on is problematic. And then he sees that the house is on fire, burning, impermanent, painful, suffocating. These are, the three poisons: greed, anger, ignorance. Our life is on fire. This beautiful house that we're so attached to is just aflame with greed, hatred, and ignorance. And then the guy who owns the house, first he says he's this old, decrepit guy, but then he says he's this really strong guy with, first there's like thousands of beings in the house, but then he says there's like 10 sons in the house. I'm sure there's a lot to say about all of that. I'm not dismissing it. We just can't get into it right now. And so to get his kids out of the burning house, because he's like, yo, get out the burning house, which of course is all of us saying, hey, come to Sesshin. Be still. Question your existence. Look at the foundations of your house intently, intensively. But the kids are like, nah, we have all these toys, we're good. And then so he's like, all right, I really got to do something here to let them see that they're in pain. That's what's so interesting, is so many of us don't know that we're suffering. And then it begs the question, who are we to tell somebody you're suffering? You just don't know it. It's really, really difficult. I don't know if y'all have that experience with people that are in your life who say, bah, humbug meditation. Or, my life is great. I don't know why I would have to give up a whole week. I could be parasailing and connecting with people, and life is so beautiful. Why would I want to? So it's interesting. Do we know better than other people? According to this part of the Lotus Sutra, this guy does know better. So then he kind of like says, hey, I have these 3 beautiful carts, and if you come out, then you can get one of these carts. And the kids are like, ooh, carts, cool. I guess, I don't know, carts were a thing back then. I don't know. Maybe like Hot Wheels, or what are those toys you used to drive in? What is it?
Go-kart?
Sure, go-karts. Nice. Yeah, go-karts. So anyway, he lies and says he has these different kinds of carts. They come out looking for it. They're out of the house, but there's only one kind of cart, and so that's an analogy for, these 3 different paths. They're actually all just one path of the great Dharma. So he tells this analogy, this story, and he says, so Shariputra, is this guy guilty of telling a falsehood? And Shariputra says, no, it's all in the benefit of others, so it's not a falsehood. So then, we'll just read a little bit here. It's already so late, gosh. The Lord said to him, they call Buddha the Lord. Very interesting in translation. The Lord said to him, very well, Shariputra. It is even as thou sayest. So too, Shariputra, the Tathagata, or the Buddha, is free from all dangers, wholly exempt from all misfortune, despondency, calamity, pain, grief, the thick enveloping dark mists of ignorance. I really, really hope that that question is with you during sesshin. What is it to be free from all dangers, exempt from misfortune, despondency, calamity, pain, grief, and the thick, enveloping, dark mists of ignorance? Because that's what this whole freaking thing, hundreds of pages, is saying. You are this. What could that possibly mean? He, the Buddha, endowed with Buddha knowledge, forces, absence of hesitation, uncommon properties, and mighty by magical power, is the Father of the world, who has reached the highest perfection in the knowledge of skillful means, who is most merciful, long-suffering, benevolent, and compassionate. So this is the Buddha talking in third person, but not. He, the Buddha, endowed with Buddha knowledge. Buddha knowledge. I think doing one block of sesshin puts us in touch with more Buddha knowledge than reading the entirety of the Lotus Sutra. I really, really think that. He's endowed with Buddha knowledge. He's endowed with forces. Okay? Absence of hesitation. That's huge. Absence of hesitation. That's wisdom. Knowing what to do in every moment. Even if what to do is to wait and to hesitate. And I think that for those of you who are doing koans, I think this is huge. And I'm working on it too. I think that's a really big part of koan practice is, what is the sound of one hand? Bam, give it. I feel like a lot of people do koans, I'll maybe ask a checking question or something and they'll kind of like sit there thinking for a long time. And that, the minute you're sitting there thinking about it, you're getting into ideas and trying to figure it out. So I'm going to be better about pushing people and pushing myself to not allow hesitation. That's kind of what koans are about. Alive, right now. Confident. Like I always say, a lot of koan practice is not about the content of the answer, but how it's presented. It's a lot of it. Yes, the content does matter for sure. But I just love this, that the Buddha is endowed with absence of hesitation. So much more alive to just like, bam, give the wrong answer than to like, and maybe like concoct the right answer. That's gross. What else is he endowed with? Uncommon properties. Interesting. Uncommon properties. Who doesn't have uncommon properties? He's endowed with a mighty magical power. Okay. The magic of complete ordinariness. Although, I don't know if anyone feels me, but particularly in sesshin, when we're doing intensive practice, or not, maybe just, sitting in traffic or whatever, I think that the power of zazen, the practice of zazen, can make, the slightest little breeze in the bamboo feel fucking magical. Sometimes, don't like look for that experience. But I don't know. When we strip everything else away, all of our ideas and concepts of things, then even putting on a sock can be a magical experience. Just feels like it. The Buddha has reached the highest perfection in the knowledge of skillful means. So, being a good teacher, meeting people where they're at, knowing who you're dealing with. I clearly saw that this is an Oprah crowd, so I dipped into that pool. um, he is merciful, and then okay, so here's really this is the good part. The Buddha is endowed with all this stuff. Buddha knowledge, has no hesitation, magical power, highest knowledge of skillful means. He's merciful and long suffering. Long suffering. That is the key. That is, to me, what it means to say the Tathagata is free from dangers, wholly exempt from all misfortune, despondency, calamity, pain, grief, and the thick enveloping dark mists of ignorance. How are we free from all of that? By being long suffering. Ooh, that's cold. I can't say anything else on top of that. Um, Maybe I'll leave it there. Yeah. So, how to be free from this world is to dive so deeply into this world that it becomes magical. And there is no separation between anything. So, yeah, I really, really hope that this inspires a little bit as we continue to sit long and hard, really just taking this opportunity to let everything go and just be this. Bear witness to this magical, suffering world.